Welcome to Inside the Director's Circle and this episode on the myths of effective communication. I'm Jason Langford-Brown, your host, founder of the Director's Circle and practicing business advisor and coaching psychologist. In the last episode, we focused on AQ, answer intelligence, the missing link, as we see it, of highly effective communication. For those that missed that episode, listen back. You might find that useful before you listen to this episode. But today we're going to focus on really busting some myths about what is highly effective communication. I think in the last episode we started that process, which I'll come back to in a second. But first of all, just to introduce our guests, as ever, we have one of our knowledge partners from the Director's Circle, Dr Brian Glibkowski, professor at the University of Chicago and creator of Answer Intelligence. With Brian, we also have a couple of our members from the Director's Circle to add a practical element to proceedings. We have our heavyweight from the steel industry, Gemma Steadman, who runs a division of the Hadley Group, one of the UK's leading manufacturers of roll-formed steel products, now a global business and now moving into the modular housing market. Gemma's got a background in large commercial sales, so it always adds an interesting dimension to this. And alongside her, we have Jacqueline Watson, marketing director at Henderson Loggie, one of Scotland's leading accountancy and advisory firms. So before we get into the conversation, just a reminder, this is just a snapshot of what happens inside the Director's Circle. If you want to get more involved in the community, get more insights and more knowledge, log into directors-circle.com and click on Join the Community button. Okay, so to get in today, we want to say bust some myths around highly effective communication. I think in the last episode, we kind of busted the first myth, which was, if you really ask great questions and listened intently, then typically highly effective communication happened. And it was all the notion that answers just kind of naturally fell from asking great questions. But Brian, maybe we'll bring you in here just to explain briefly, why answer intelligence and AQ is so important in this kind of circle of highly effective communication.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'll briefly introduce AQ and sort of then put it in a context of a myth. Answer intelligence is the ability to provide elevated answers to important questions. So I've conducted research on the answer side of the equation, something underappreciated. There's 6 answer types: story, theory, metaphor, concept, procedure, action, that map to different questions. And when you provide answers, you influence others. Now, briefly, in terms of a myth, so I wrote a book on this and went to market, and we have certified partners in 13 countries. A lot of organizations have been using this, and one thing I really came aware of was the fact that there's this myth about what communication is. And before COVID and virtualization, communication consisted of longer meetings, right, face to face, and when we get to virtualizations, there's shorter meetings. And there's a premium on communication. And communication, simply put, is question and answer exchange. Effective meetings are the ability to communicate on point with questions and answers. And if you do that well, you're going to succeed. The days when you could sell to someone and expect an hour meeting are gone. Now you have 15 minutes. And guess what? The buyer's camera may be off. You better be effective at communication. And that's sort of, I think, the myth that sort of, came to the forefront for me when we started to apply AQ.
Yeah, I think that's a great start to the conversation on that myth, Brian. And maybe I'll bring Gemma straight in there, because Gemma, you would have experienced exactly what Brian's talking about over the last couple of years. What's your take on that, and how's that changed for you with your sales team and your business at large?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point with particularly the camera point. If you think back to traditional sales meeting environments, you're building the rapport, you have the educational side of it, with regards to if you're selling something technical and it's you're the know-how partner and they work with you because you're easy to deal with, and you've got the expertise, so you had more opportunity to influence and convince the person on the other side that you were the right partner for them. And then remove the personal element, then potentially remove the visual element, and all of a sudden you're blind in a way, because previously you're reading body language, you're getting little signs and ticks, and then you're leading the meeting on. You're reading the room to judge what you need to do next. Take it all away, it becomes transactional, and that's where nobody really wants to be. And that, as you say, is the moment when on point is the thing that I listen to, because how much time do you have in that forum to get the message across and to make it resonate. Very little compared to a face-to-face meeting of days gone past.
So on that, Gemma, do you think Brian's work can help in that scenario? But do you think there's still a need to actually drive back more to face-to-face? Is it all doable in a blind environment if you get the questions and answers perfect?
I think, in some ways, there are horses for courses. I remember when we all had to, it depends on what industry you're in, because speaking with friends, they were already in the digital world, and that was already their platform and medium. For other more traditional businesses, it wasn't. So we had to adapt and adjust, and then we found it extremely effective. But then springboard a couple of years later, there was a need or a want, and definitely a desire to get a little bit back together into a room. Was that about the sales process, or was that just about personal relations with people and just wanting more normality? I don't know. But certainly, that aside, the time you get with a potential customer, prospect, colleague, it's reducing, because everybody is expected to get more into their day. So the ability to effectively communicate, and probably to reduce what you want to say into something that's more manageable and processable, that's on point, is definitely valuable.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that whichever way you take that argument, I agree. I think there is less time, and I think where I'm seeing businesses land generally is there's less time. Also, some things can just be highly effective in short bursts. So where Brian's work comes in is really powerful there. And I think it's picking and choosing where you're going to add real great value in those face-to-face interactions, rather than just going there because you want a cup of tea or a slice of cake. Yeah. Brian,
Jason, if I could just jump in, one of the things we found with, high AQ answers is versioning. So if you have a story, can you have 3 versions? Long, medium, short. And the long may be a minute and a half. The short may be 10 seconds. You do that for all the different answers. Now, procedures. Well, how do we work with you? Have a short version, 3-step procedure. Have a long version. It's a flow chart. You have to be able to version, go where the clients are, give them the amount of answer they want that's most effective at a given time.
And Brian, sales is a great example of AQ in action, but we know there's coaching, there's leadership, and everything else. And I think you take that into as a coach, but also as a leader. Versioning in those scenarios as well, really powerful. I've just literally come off a call before this podcast with a client who literally in the last 5 minutes dropped a massive bombshell on me, and I was like, ugh. Now normally I'd have spent an hour with him on that subject, and I know not consciously, but now you've said it to me, I consciously found myself doing a short version of, because I needed to give him something until I got him back in the room, which would be another 3 weeks probably. So I think that's a great insight. That version is something that I think that will certainly help me in that coaching and the leadership. For you, Jacqueline, any kind of insights on that myth around the virtual world, etc.?
Yeah, I think there is a gap where people need more tools, because it's also, so many people have experienced burnout and different life events that have happened over the last couple of years. Some people have managed the working from home well, others have not. People have changed their approach to their life in a lot of ways, and I think having a tool where you can, it's the adaptability. You need to be more adaptable to, even for someone you might know in a sales or a work environment, someone you might know really well and you think you know really well, but actually you have to adapt to them in a different way because of what is going on with them in that moment in time. Could be completely different to, a couple of weeks down the line when they could be in a completely different position. And so I think there just has to be that awareness, and I'm definitely more consciously aware of with colleagues, with, all aspects of my life, that people are operating slightly different. I don't think it was probably similar prior to COVID as well, but it's just heightened. It's heightened because we're also in the virtual world. There are these shorter time frames, so you need to be more adaptable to people's styles and to get your message across in the most effective way, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, Jacqueline, you and I have talked about agility and adaptability in different contexts before. And I think one thing we know about agility and adaptability, you need a foundation to be adaptable or agile from. And of course, AQ gives you a great foundation, doesn't it? To
Yeah.
go back to and go, how do I flex from my position depending on where I am? I love that. Thank you, Jacqueline. So look, we said we're going to bust some myths today. So I thought we'd do for the rest of the podcast. I've just got a few myths that I'm going to stick out there as questions. And maybe, I know I haven't prepped you guys on this, so I might be catching you on the hoof, but I'll chuck these questions out and let's just see kind of how we respond to them. So my first one is question: stick to your style because being authentic is much more important than anything else. How would you respond to that? Brian, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think it's sort of related to personality. We have certain traits and styles. A lot of the personality approaches you want to flex to other approaches, but you're going to have natural strengths. So in AQ terms, there's different answer types you prefer. So it's maybe story or metaphor, more relational. And so you're going to stick with that because you're a student of stories and metaphors. You probably accumulate a lot of stories, a lot of metaphors, and you can contribute value in that way. So I think it's good to stick to your strengths, but also to the prior point about flexibility and adaptability, you have to be able to, go to something else like a procedure. But the interesting thing we found in our research is that if you're really strong in one area, say a story, the story so well, you can actually transform it into a procedure. And that's sort of the brilliance of it. So you actually turn your strength into something completely different. And so that's sort of the really cool thing about it.
That's cool. And Jacqueline, for you, what's your view on that question?
Yeah, I think it's definitely about authenticity. It has to be, and I don't think there's anywhere to hide in the virtual world either. I think that you have to bring your whole self and to work, and you have to encourage others to do that as well, and provide a sort of safe space for people to be themselves and be their authentic selves, because there's no point in you being entirely authentic and you bringing your whole self to work but no one else doing the same. So you have to create an environment where that's possible for everyone, and it's not just not just the privilege of the few. It's for everyone.
Yeah, great. That's great. So I'm going to come back to something on that in a second, Jacqueline, but I'll ask Gemma to give her view on that question first.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that it's very powerful to know, as Brian was saying, your strengths, because we do have a natural tendency to flow in certain ways, and I think having that self-awareness, really, because you can have the pressure of the world on your shoulders on that day, which may influence, perhaps your style in maybe the negative sense. So being able to recognize that, so that then, and I quite like the idea of using one of your strengths, but then leveraging it for, the story, as you said, procedurally, and linking that to it. I think you have to be authentic, because otherwise it's going to be hugely tiring to not be. But I think it's something and I definitely try, and I've been trying, certainly, Jason, we've spoken about it. I've been trying to recognize, my strengths and areas that, are just natural, and then some that, can maybe be improved and refined, because people like detail as an example, some people don't, and
Yeah,
I'm a
absolutely.
detail person, and then you've only got, as we were saying, the communication, only got a small piece of time to do it, and you need to then flex it, really, don't you, to use the time and to be as effective as you can be, so I think I agree with everyone. You have to be authentic, but it would be a strong skill to be able to flex it when it's appropriate as well.
Absolutely. Brian, you wanted to just add something to that?
I wanted to, great points. I wanted to come in with a sort of a related but distinct perspective. We think of I'm good at stories or procedures or actions and style. Another thing we found is that there's oftentimes topics we really care about. So some of my research was based on what the top golf instructors did in the world, and they were students of golf or anything related to it. So they knew the physics of golf, the psychology of golf. One person had a library of 3,500 books, so they could go any single direction. So another way to think about this is, which topics do you really care about? You may be a leader, then you're probably going to know all these answers, or in sales, you're a student of everything. So encourage people to sort of become experts on a given topic, and you're going to sort of really grow in all these areas naturally, I think.
Yeah, that's a nice different dynamic, and I think just my view, I think it's a paradox with leadership. I think the need to be authentic is. I agree with everything you guys have said. You have to be authentic. I think Gemma, you said it. Otherwise, it's exhausting. I think the other thing is as well, people just don't trust you because you don't smell right, do you, if you're not being authentic? But of course, we have to flex because that's our job as a leader, to flex to the audience in front of us. So I think to better manage that paradox. So I love Brian's point about actually recognizing your style and then being able to use that to flex to an area maybe you're not so strong at. So I'm going to look into that definitely. Okay, let's do another one. So as a leader, you can communicate too much. Maybe start with Jacqueline on that one. As a marketeer, she might have a view on communicate too much as a leader.
Yeah, I probably say there probably are points where you can communicate too much, and I think you have to have again. It's creating a safe environment so that you can have conflict about the communication, or you can have open dialogue about the communication. Because if I think over communication on certain points, and particularly over the last couple of years, I think personally as a firm, we've had to over communicate on a number of issues because just to actually get the message across to people. However, it's equally as important to create a safe space for everyone to air their views on that communication as well, or else it just becomes a kind of a vacuum. So I think there are definitely points where you can over communicate.
Great, thanks, Jacqueline. Gemma, for you?
Yeah, I think I think that we were all forced, certainly in my experience, we were forced to communicate more because there was a lot of uncertainty in the world and the market, and personally, and real personal things that were relating to people's livelihoods and motivation and worry, I suppose. So we found ourselves communicating, and actually we got really positive feedback, that it was well received. There was a sense of alignment together as a business, that we're all moving in a direction. But I think then there was a needed time to drop it because it was not really given anything new, or maybe not. We didn't drop it. I'm thinking, we did like weekly updates. We extended them out, but it was useful and it drip fed and it kept everybody together, particularly when we had a situation where there was a lot of people that were normally in the business that were now no longer sitting in the business, and that kept them joined in contact, together as a community. But I think there's the definite risk of over communicating, and I think particularly when you're trying to drive change, that's the biggest risk, because it's just constant, and then the point and the real valuable things that are going to support the change initiatives, they're kind of lost in all of they can get lost, sorry, in sometimes all the noise. And I think that's an important thing that we've looked at and thought, we need to be quite deliberate with our communication and strike the right balance.
Yeah, before I bring Brian in, I'm going to sort of add my view on it, because I think there is a big question, which I think you're maybe touching on around, depends on the context and probably the quality of the communication. But in my experience, with leaders, I see most leaders, in my opinion, under communicating. And what do I mean by that? I think as leaders, we've got everything's running through our head all the time. So, our strategy, our plans, our challenges, and then, for example, once a quarter, we stand on the box and talk to our team and say, let me tell you where we're going. Let me tell you our vision. And then we go back and then run it through our head for 3 months. And then we wonder why our team don't know where we're going, aren't in tune with what we're trying to do. So I think generally I see a lack of communication. And I almost try and talk about leaders thinking about over communicating, because the communication to yourself versus the communication outward is massively different, and I think leaders sometimes don't see that. But I do agree. I think if you're just transmitting, which probably isn't communicating, then that's just noise, isn't it? So that's maybe just a slightly different context to it. But I wonder, Brian, if you want to jump in there
I'm
and
glad
add some
you
views.
went before me, because I was going to say, yes, people can over communicate, but I think you're right. They can under communicate. And I think what you want is communication at the right level. And case in point, in my book, I have a chapter on sales, and it was co-authored by Salesforce and Gong records sales calls. And one of the things Gong has found with sales calls, the most effective sales calls, you know what they are? They're balanced. Each side speaks about equally. Each side has equal questions and answers. If you think about it as a sort of a straw person experiment, if you go out to the pub, what are you looking for? Balanced conversations. If you're asking all the questions or someone's providing all the answers, that's no fun. And I think what you get is sort of an upward virtual spiral with relationships and conversations. If it's balanced, all of a sudden it goes up and up and up. Everyone's talking a lot, but you're getting a lot of success. So you want to be balanced. The other point, I think, is just commenting on sort of the pointedness of any given answer. So if you like to tell stories, it's better to tell one story that blows someone away than 3 stories. Think of a movie. You go to a movie and someone's telling a story. They don't just, this is story 1 of 3. It's the powerful story. So it's about balance, about getting it right. And I think that's what I would say on this.
Yeah, and I think you could apply that to dating and probably any number of communications that happen in the world. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Well, look, I'm just conscious of time, so we could sit and probably bust a million myths today, but hopefully that was just a start for the listeners. But in terms of, just wrapping up, for me, I think some great points in there. I think balance and quality in communication, I think is probably a great way to summarize some of the things we've talked about. I love that we're starting to see AQ as a tool, and I think, Jacqueline, you were talking about it as a tool and maybe a foundation to be adaptable, which I think is great. And I think for me that notion of versioning, so having short, medium, and long versions of your responses in communication, particularly around answers, I think is something that I'm definitely going to take away from today. But just to finish, maybe from each of you, just maybe take, if I was to say one pitfall that our listeners need to avoid in terms of successfully communicating with their teams or with their clients, what would you maybe leave our listeners with? Brian, maybe start with you.
I'll say, remember the purpose of a conversation. And to me, it's question and answer exchange. And if you have that in mind, you can navigate the conversation effectively.
That's great. Thank you, Brian. Jacqueline?
I think for me, it is to deeply understand your audience, whoever that may be, if that's a one-on-one or if that's a much larger audience. You have to deeply understand them and what is going on with them in their life or in that market or in that world.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Jacqueline. And Gemma?
The point about balance really resonated with me, because I do agree with you, Jason, and actually maybe at different levels, the hierarchy, the communication isn't as frequent as maybe we think it is. And I think there's just, the risk is if we don't have the balance in terms of what we're trying to communicate and finding, as you say, the question and answers together. So I think there's a pitfall if we don't get the balance right, because then we lose the effectiveness of whatever we're trying to communicate.
And if you take that balance that Brian was talking about, we think about when we're communicating to our teams, it's very rare that, we always complain they don't ask us any questions, trying to encourage them to ask us more questions so we get that balance would probably drive far richer conversations.
Definitely.
I totally agree. Guys, listen, I'd love to talk about this for longer, but I need to say thank you again for joining us in this podcast. It's been great to hear from you. In our next episode, we're going to change of subject. We're going to welcome Alex Bishop, who's the National Head of Dispute Resolution at award-winning law firm Shoesmiths, and we're going to start talking about the challenge of conflict resolution. So tune in for that episode in a few weeks' time. But if you want more on the subject of AQ, I think as Brian has probably mentioned, get hold of his book or go to his website where you can take some questionnaires that will get you on the journey of AQ, or you can reach out to one of our knowledge partners, Lucid, at lucid-group.com, who are one of the AQ practitioners here in the UK. So in the meantime, thank you for listening to Inside the Director's Circle.